September 26th, 1954. A woman by the name of Lucette Lebouf was picking berries outside the small town of Chabouilly in France when her dog Dolly started acting up around this nearby scarecrow. As she went to see what the matter was with her dog, she realized that it was not a scarecrow at all, and whatever this thing was headed straight towards her. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Now, first and foremost, you may notice that my background is not exactly the same. I mean, the really important thing is that the poster is still there. So yeah, I mean, if the poster is there, all is right with the world. I will tell you the reason for this absolute madness and chaos is because the house is getting renovated. So I'm excited about that, obviously, because, you know, renovations are much needed on an old house, but also because it is an old house. And considering that by old house I mean it's 150 some years old, and it has had its share of bizarre occurrences, I can only hope that that old trope holds true, and the ghosts want to pop up and see what we're doing with the place. I'll keep you guys updated. So, without further ado, however, today we will be discussing the fascinating case of the Cellophane Scarecrow. Now, this case is part of the infamous French flap of 1954, discussed at length in many places, including Vallee's Passport to Magonia. And to be honest, I have held off from kind of opening this giant can of UFO occupants simply because there are so many fantastic encounters. I always kind of was like, unsure of which one to start with. So after very much deliberation, I have decided to start with one that involves one Madame Lucette Lebouf, who the afternoon of Sunday, September 26, 1954, saw something otherworldly in the small town of Chabouilly in the Drôme region of France. That Sunday afternoon, Madame Lebouf had gone to Chabouilly to spend the day with her grandfather. She continued on to some nearby woods to look for edible mushrooms when she ran across some blackberries on a hedge and began picking those. Suddenly, as she was picking these blackberries, her dog Dolly began to bark and howl in great distress. Lucette looked up and saw that Dolly was standing, barking hysterically at a nearby scarecrow. Now, this scarecrow stood kind of right at the division between the path that Lucette was on, as well as some nearby fields. Now, she approached the spot where her dog was facing off against the scarecrow, only to realize that it was not, as you may have expected, a scarecrow at all. No, Lucette realized that instead she was looking at something which appeared to be a 3-foot-tall clear diving suit, and what's more, that there was something inside this diving suit. Through the kind of bell-shaped helmet, she said that she saw huge eyes staring back at her, eyes which she claimed she couldn't break eye contact with for the entire duration of the encounter. She said that it gave the impression overall of looking like a, quote, child in a cellophane bag. She also said that it held its arms so close to its body that she couldn't really see them, and also, a really odd detail is that she said that it didn't have any hair, however it had a black mass in place of it. Now, as the horrifying realization that this scarecrow was instead some sort of a giant-eyed, cellophane-wrapped being, this thing began moving towards her with a strange hopping gait. Now, at this point, Lucette did what I think most people would do and absolutely panicked. At first frozen with fear, she finally screamed and then ran away at top speed, literally diving into a nearby bush. Dolly continued barking and howling at the creature, which took no notice even as the other dogs in the village started joining in. Now, when she finally worked up the courage to look back, the being was completely gone. However, just as Lucette looked, a large, flattened, metallic object suddenly rose from behind some nearby trees, hissing or whistling as it moved off. It was at this point that Monsieur Lebouf, as well as a group of people who had been visiting a nearby cemetery, because did I forget to mention that there was a cemetery near this encounter, rushed to Lucette's aid, and it's a good thing that they did. She collapsed from fright and apparently suffered from fever for the next 2 days. Even poor Dolly was so frightened by her experience that she didn't stop shaking for 3 days after the incident. Some of the onlookers took it upon themselves to search the area for the strange being. However, all they found was a circular area of crushed shrubbery about 10 feet in diameter, as well as multiple broken branches and branches with stripped leaves. Now, this is a really classic case for a variety of reasons. The first, which Vallee pointed out in Passport to Magonia, is the obvious folkloric connection between berry picking and anomalous encounters. In Passport to Magonia, he literally has a nearly exact encounter with a quote-unquote leprechaun from an Irish story, which is pretty much the same as this encounter. Someone's berry picking when suddenly they see this strange being. I mean, it follows the exact same pattern. Now, I find it interesting here that not only was she literally picking berries when this occurred, but what actually led her to that area was hunting for mushrooms. Another motif common in fairy lore, oddly enough, UFO encounters, as well as, of course, in many cultures, very ritualistic ties. Different mushrooms, I know, but still, I find it interesting. Another great aspect of this encounter is that the witnesses' attention was drawn to the anomaly actually by their dog. Again, I just had an encounter like this, the Barbara Crabtree encounter from my Knox County Booger episode, where it seems like these people are just going about their day. Suddenly their dog notices something strange first, draws their attention to it, and then they have the encounter. Of course, dogs seem to really have a prime spot between the witness and the anomaly. And speaking of that kind of liminal area, again, we have this fantastic point between, this liminal zone of the Scarecrow, quote unquote, standing right at the edge of a field and a path in the woods, sort of this boundary, symbolically speaking, between something cultivated and something wild. Now, as for the being itself, the first thing which draws my attention is the first thing that drew Lucette's attention, the eyes. Her claim that she couldn't look away, as well as detailing in many accounts that the eyes seemed expressive and intelligent, mirrors so many other encounters, not just with UFO occupants, but other anomalies like Bigfoot or notably Mothman, where the eyes seem to be the only real important part of the entity. Now, in this case as well, we have this fantastic and fascinating cellophane suit. The fact that this translucent suit apparently appeared to kind of dull the image of whatever was inside of it, especially the face. Lucette claimed that the bell-shaped helmet kind of distorted or sort of fogged in a weird way the face, and all she could see were the eyes. Really reminds me of classic ghost, woman in white, or even banshee encounters in which the face is obscured by a veil. Now, of course, this falls in line with other, so-called faceless entities. I did a video on that a while ago, which again pop up in every single different branch of paranormal research. Now, in this case, we also have the leaving of trace evidence, which is intriguing because, so often it's kind of easy to think that, well, maybe these experiences are exclusively subjective to the witness. Maybe they're occurring on some, almost spiritual plane. Yet here we have, again, this trace evidence, this crushed circular area, which of course falls neatly in line with crop circles, fairy rings, so-called Bigfoot nests, you name it. Again, too, it's interesting that while Lucette was the only one to witness the being in the craft, there was this objective response in the form of all the dogs going berserk, as well as other witnesses hearing the whistling noise and seeing this trace evidence. Now, on that topic of other witnesses, I find it really interesting, too, that the sighting was in such close proximity to a cemetery that people literally came running from the cemetery to see what the ruckus was. Now, multiple reports from the French Flap involve cemeteries, but a good number of encounters across the board, UFOs, Bigfoots, of course, ghosts, also occur near cemeteries, too. This case also deals with one of those weird aspects of perfect timing. Not only was Lucette just so happened to be in the right place at the right time to see the strange being, but when she had dove into the brush and looked back to see if the being was still there, it was at that exact moment that the so-called craft decided just to take off up into the sky. I just find that so odd that so often these encounters, it really seems like it couldn't be planned any better to have, the encounter itself or multiple junctures of the encounter kind of occurring at these perfect moments. Like if the witness had looked just a second later, they would have missed it, or they wouldn't have seen, the entire, the takeoff. She sees this thing rising up from behind the trees. And I think that this really, again, just kind of points to the intrinsic nature of the observer in what they're observing. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Cellophane Scarecrow, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with my free blog on patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat, and for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.